let's talk about CSS3 Flexbox. And before we get rolling here, just let me point out that it would be very helpful, very useful for you to go to W3 Schools and find CSS3 Flexbox. All right. And use this page for the information which is available to you and also the try it yourself options, because I really believe going into the code and making changes and just seeing how things work visually can be very, very helpful. You might prefer using CSS Tricks, a complete guide to Flexbox, and here's the URL up here, as well as W3 Schools URL. And I will also place both these links in the Read More section underneath the videos. All right, so before we get rolling, let's just briefly talk about CSS Floats. So prior to CSS3 Flexbox, we used floats. Floats allowed us to take elements and remove them from the flow of the document. Otherwise, like block level elements which stack up, we would be able to treat them as if they, well, not if, but we could make them go from the left to the right-hand side or the right to the left-hand side. We could also have them basically change scale, and we could have them stack up on top of each other. So they were very flexible. And when I say they, CSS Floats. However, floats have a bit of a issue as far as dealing with heights. They are usually limited to the height of the content. So if you had multiple floats, just like in this example here with Flexbox, all of these elements, if we had different amounts of content, then they would have different heights. And that's something that is not an issue. That is something that's easy to work with in CSS Flexbox. All right, so where I'm going with this is floats are great. Floats work. A lot of people don't like them. A lot of people don't understand them. A lot of people believe that you should probably abandon them and go with CSS Flexbox. So I'm going to leave that up to you, but I do find that Flexbox has a lot of advantages, and the biggest is it just really makes having your column and row flexible layouts. It's so much easier to do it with Flexbox. All right, so let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about Flexbox. And let's scroll down, and you'll see here that basically, as I was just talking about, before Flexbox, there were 4 layout modes. Otherwise, our block elements, which just stack up on top of each other. Our inline text elements, so when we had inline block or text elements. And then something that we haven't really talked about too much in the class, and that's working with tables, which tables are really columns and rows with headers that are meant to hold tabular data. There was a time that people used to make their websites out of tables, and it was called table-based design. And thank goodness that is something from a long time ago that we'll never revisit again. Okay. Then the last, or the fourth, is position for explicit position. So static, relative, absolute, fixed. All right. So we can move elements around with Flexbox without having to worry about block level elements, inline, dealing with tables, or even really messing with positions. Okay. All right. So as an example, let's just take a look at what we have right up here. Okay, so if we just do a quick try it ourselves, you're going to see that we have Flex Container, and what we'll do is we'll just briefly point out that you are going to have a parent element. This parent element is what is the Flexbox. So in this case, we have class flex container, and you will see that our class flex container is set display flex. So any element which is a descendant inside of this element will receive the flex ability, if you will. And we're going to, and you'll see that the flex wrap is set to no wrap. So basically, if we come down here, we will now see flex container greater than sign div. So this is basically a selector which is saying that all of the descendant divs of flex container are going to take on these rules over here. All right, so you'll just see these are a bunch of divs. All of these divs are being given these rules. Okay, so there's our setup. So basically, with Flexbox, we're not setting a wrap. So what would happen is in a scenario where a web page was made more narrow, and this could be going from a desktop to a tablet to a handheld device like a smartphone. What would happen as our width or our viewport becomes more narrow, you'll see that the elements simply squish. Okay, we didn't have to tell them to be a percentage. We didn't have to call out any sort of widths. Flexbox is doing that for us. So if we were to change flex wrap instead of no wrap, if we change this to wrap and then go ahead and run, you'll see that now our widths of 100 pixels, okay, is being respected, if you will. And these items are flowing kind of like old school floats. So basically we have 1, 2, 3 through 8 flowing from the left hand side to the right until we run out of room, and then we drop back down. So Flexbox is a really nice way of making rows and columns very easily out of your content, or using rows and columns to establish a responsive design layout, or just an easily proportioned designed layout. All right, so there's our basic introduction to Flexbox. We'll start talking about the more specific properties and values in the next video.